So I'll just start by introducing our League of Women Voters of North Carolina president, Jennifer Rubin, for a few comments.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you all for tuning in this evening for this important program on public education. As many of you know, the League of Women Voters is a respected grassroots organization with a mission of defending democracy and empowering voters. We're made up of national, state, and local organizations with over 800 state and local leagues nationally, and we have 15 very active local leagues in North Carolina. We are expressly nonpartisan. We never endorse or oppose political parties or candidates, but we do engage in educational and advocacy efforts on issues of importance to the league and to promote voter participation. We believe our democracy is strongest when every voice is heard. Our members are working hard right now to register voters, inform them of new voting laws, monitor Board of Elections meetings, manage our voter information tool, Vote 411, hold candidate forums, and much, much more during this important election season. Part of our role to empower voters is our commitment to help inform citizens of issues that they need to be aware of to be an informed voter in North Carolina. In our state, public education is one of those issues. We will also be hosting a program about the importance of judicial elections with our Wake League at Meredith College next week on October 15th at 5:30 p.m. A recording of that also important program will be made available to everyone who registered for this event. Before I turn the program over to Sarah, I'd just like to send a special message to our members and our friends in the western part of the state. Many are still without power or worse, and we are holding you all close to our hearts and doing what we can to support recovery efforts. Now I'd like to introduce Sarah Basinger. Sarah is an LWVNC board member and the board liaison to our Public Education League Action Team. Sarah?
Thank you, Jennifer. And so as we go through this program, I'd like to ask for participants. You're going to be muted, but feel free to ask questions using the chat, and we'll address as many as we can during the Q&A section of our program. So good evening. We're so glad you can join us, and tonight we'll be focusing on a topic that lies at the heart of North Carolina's future: the role of public education in shaping and supporting our state's economy. It's an issue that affects us all: students, families, teachers, businesses, and the broader community. During the past year, our public education team, led by Jean Smith, Rebecca Poling, and Lucy Bond, has conducted several listening sessions across the state. League members shared how essential a role public schools play in their communities. However, three main concerns emerged from every corner of the state. Those are teacher shortages, inadequate funding, and the declining public support for public education. These issues cannot be ignored. What stood out to us was that 75% of North Carolinians do not have school-age children and may not feel directly connected to the public schools. Yet, as one of the fastest growing states in the U.S., our future prosperity depends on ensuring a robust public education system that serves all students. As many newcomers are not aware of these issues, the education team has created resources to help North Carolinians better understand. We created palm cards that describe why public schools matter, who is responsible for its policy and funding, and how we measure up in the U.S., which sadly is not very well. We also ran a social media campaign to sound the alarm about teacher shortages. which we plan to run again this spring. These resources and more may be accessed on our team page on the North Carolina League of Women Voters website. So what's at stake? Public education is the backbone of our economy. Investing in it fosters critical skills like problem solving, communication, and leadership, the very traits that drive innovation and economic growth. A strong education system creates a skilled workforce ready to contribute to our communities and businesses. These same critical thinking skills are vital for for engaging citizens. I want to this conversation is timely. Tomorrow, our state legislators will reconvene to make critical decisions, including whether or not to override Governor Roy Cooper's veto of House Bill 10, which, among other things, will provide more funding for opportunity scholarships, also known as vouchers, a move that will irreparably shape, or one might say distort, the future of public education in North Carolina. With that, I'm thrilled to introduce someone who has been a key advocate for public education funding, Alexandra Forter Sirota, the Executive Director of the NC Budget and Tax Center, where she oversees the strategic direction of the organization. Alexandra's leadership in advancing economic opportunity and shared prosperity has been pivotal in shaping public policy debates here in North Carolina. She's been described by one of our members, who I know is on the call, Yvonne Brannon of Public Schools First NC, as the smartest person in Raleigh. Alexandra's deep understanding of the intersection between education, tax policy, and economic growth makes her uniquely qualified to speak to us tonight about the importance of investing in public schools. Please join me in welcoming Alexandra Forter Sirota.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you all for being here. I'm really excited for this conversation and have a few slides, as I tend to do, to share with you about the work that we've been doing to really lift up the importance of connecting public education, our state budget, and our dollars, and our future. The North Carolina Budget and Tax Center, for those of you who don't know about our work, is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that focuses on the ways in which our budget, tax, and economic policies can advance opportunity for everyone in our state, with the input of those across the state into the policy process. We believe that we all have to participate in building the economy that we need for everyone to thrive. So I'm very excited to be here to talk a little bit about public education and the connection to our economy. One of the things I think I wanted to start out with was just an overview of 3 key points I hope you walk away from this conversation with. As you already heard, public education is critical infrastructure for an economy. It's not often thought of as infrastructure, but it is the foundation upon which our economy is able to move forward, is able to stabilize in times of crisis, and is able to deliver better outcomes for more people. Public education requires public money over the long term. This is critical at a moment when we know that there are many disruptions to funding sources. There are many planned limits on public money. Making sure that public education has public funding over the long term is essential. Finally, public education can truly build an economy for all. It can break down barriers to opportunity and ensure that the full potential of North Carolina is reached across our state. So a little bit about the economics behind this. At a very high level, there are so many pathways in which public schools deliver for North Carolina's economy. And I think we all know them intuitively, but it's always helpful to trace them out as we're thinking about how we talk about these connections. Public schools provide human capital. They add to the human capital in our state, and that increases productivity. It allows for the creation and transmission of new knowledge. That means that more people are able to take advantage of technology and advanced equipment, again, increasing productivity. It's also the case that public schools encourage private investment in an area. The quality of a public school, the accessibility of a public school matters for driving private investments. And it's true that public schools deliver by addressing inequities in the distribution of opportunity. Public schools serve every child, and in so doing, ensures that where someone comes from, who their family is, the income their family has, does not place a limit on their potential to achieve greatness in their life. And then finally, public schools provide directly jobs in many local communities across the state. So these pathways are incredibly important. And I just want to take a deeper dive on this connection between public education and economic growth. There's been a lot of research about this connection, but I think this piece in particular is compelling in outlining that for every $1 in investment in K through 12 educational services, there's a $6.66 return in economic growth. So just looking at how do we measure economic progress using traditional terms, you can see the tremendous impact that public education can have on driving economic growth, which ideally should deliver well-being, and we'll talk more about that. As I said earlier, public schools also deliver directly for North Carolina's economy. Public schools are the largest or second largest employer in 84 of the state's 100 counties. This means that public school employees, from the teachers to the bus drivers to the cafeteria workers to the school administrative officers, they are in communities. Their wages, their compensation, their employment is creating a stabilizing force as they go to the local grocery store, as they pay their rent, as they connect with shops and opportunities in their community. There is no separate place that public school employees shop. That money is part of the consumer base of our local economies. And without the strong employment and strong wages for public employees, we see a diminished value. So in many ways, public schools are delivering directly right now for North Carolina's economy. But I want to take a step broader beyond growth. At the Budget and Tech Center, we think a lot about traditional measures of economic progress, but we at our core want to be thinking about, is economic growth, is economic progress delivering well-being? Is it making people healthier? Is it making sure that people have the income to take time out to be with family and make sure that their elders are cared for? Is it making stronger connections across community to allow for participation in civic life? We know that public education, in addition to having a direct connection to economic growth, has an impact on health outcomes, has an impact on earnings potential over a lifetime, and can contribute to civic participation. So in many ways, public education is important because it supports our economy, but it's essential because it can deliver well-being to more people across our state. This connection, I think, between public education and the economy is sometimes easiest to describe in all of its complexity with a case study. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the lessons from the Great Recession. The Great Recession was a significant economic downturn that resulted in a 15% decline in revenue in one single year. That number will be important later, but what that that loss in revenue meant was that North Carolina's funding effort and ability to deliver for children across the state was impacted. Over the decades since the Great Recession, so 2008 to 2018, North Carolina's funding efforts, so its use of the wealth it had in the state, declined by 24%. And that was a loss of $4 billion for children in public schools. That meant fewer teachers in classrooms, fewer school personnel able to support children's education. And we know that nationally, schools with and in North Carolina, schools with concentrations of students from poor households saw greater reductions, and there was a loss of education jobs. These lessons I highlight because there's a way in which our education funding can be a stabilizer in a time of crisis, in a time of an economic downturn, if we maintain our funding effort, if we maintain a commitment to keep public school workers employed, to make sure children are getting the same quality education as a generation that did not experience the kinds of depths of an economic downturn. And so it's critical as we're thinking about this economic outcomes that we're seeking in communities that we think about the role of state budgets. And state budget decisions matter for whether our public schools can have the stabilizing and generative effect in our economy. We know from the research, and this is just a few examples, that budget decisions, funding specifically, and funding levels matter for recruiting, developing, and retaining high quality teachers, for keeping class sizes small and manageable to support the individualized learning that we know children need, for expanding time learning, and for providing the kind of high quality early education that sets K through 12 students up for maximum success. So state budget decisions matter, and they particularly matter in North Carolina. So I was struck, Sarah, by your point about the focus group conversations and the idea of newcomers. Many newcomers coming to North Carolina aren't used to potentially such a state level commitment to public education. And it's a critical part of our Constitution that the state has committed to fund public schools in every community. It's also, I would argue, a critical commitment to the future of North Carolina, because it recognizes that where someone lives shouldn't determine whether they have access to a quality education. And, you know, in the context of our total budget, it is a significant share of the money that we pool together through our taxes to make investments in the public good and public well-being. So state funding is critical. It's a tool for equity. It's a tool for ensuring that over time our state can continue to make sure every child has the tools to move ahead. But there are real threats to public education investments in North Carolina. I'll name three major threats on the horizon for public education funding. Right now, schools are dealing with the expiration of federal funding that was extended during the COVID-19 pandemic. These funds, they're shortened to be called ESSER funds, expired at the end of September. They represented a significant stabilizing effect for particularly low wealth school districts in Eastern North Carolina, who saw more than 10% of their public school district spending supported by these federal dollars. To date, there has been no action by the State General Assembly to address the expiration of this federal funding and ensure that school districts have funding to continue to serve students. You heard about the expansion of private school vouchers that is being contemplated by the legislature as early as tomorrow through a veto override of a bill that proposed an expansion of private school vouchers to the very wealthiest North Carolinians on the waiting list right now. And I think it's important to note that this current expansion is very much targeting a group of North Carolinians with very high incomes. It's made the program accessible to folks who have already made a decision to have their children in private schools. And you can see that through analysis that we're seeing the disparate impact across racial lines as well in terms of who is benefiting from private school voucher expansion. The third and large threat facing public education investment is the march to zero income tax. North Carolina has been, legislators have been pursuing a march to zero income tax that by 2030 will mean corporations pay zero income tax in North Carolina on their profits. There are also scheduled reductions to the personal income tax rate. And these mean that the largest share of revenue coming in to fund the significant investment in public schools that we need to be making will continue to diminish year after year. And I'll share more about that in a minute. But we don't have to look ahead to know what's happening in public schools right now. State budget decisions in North Carolina are making it harder for public schools to deliver to communities across the state the economic well-being promise, the educational promise of public schools. We hear stories time and again of bus driver shortages, people getting to school late, missing classes. We hear of vacancies, teacher vacancies that are quite significant, and additional challenges in the early childhood and education system that continue to unfold as providers lack the funding to provide competitive wages and living wages to their employees. So right now, things are challenging because of the shift in policy decisions, but they're scheduled to get even more challenging. So in North Carolina, we have a series of tax cuts that are scheduled through 2030. You can see the breakdown of what these tax cuts are, and I'm happy to talk more about them. But in total, by 2031, they're estimated to mean a loss of over $13 billion in annual revenue to the state's general fund. That's more than we spend on public schools in North Carolina overall. It is more than a third of the current state budget. And so I mentioned before to remember the number I used in the lessons on the Great Recession. That revenue shortfall was 15%. This revenue shortfall is double what we experienced during one of the worst economic downturns our state has experienced. And it is preventable. I think, again, the driver of this idea of income tax cuts for the rich and for profitable corporations is a kind of economic model that is standing in stark contrast to the economic model that I just shared to you, where we invest in people's human capital, we make sure people have the education and the connection to community to be able to increase their earnings, increase their health, and live a good life. The idea of corporate income tax cuts and tax cuts for the very rich is that by delivering to the richest 20%, more than 2/3 of the tax cuts that will happen because of rate reductions, that those dollars will trickle down to create jobs and boost earnings in communities. This economic model has been largely debunked both at the national level and across the country in states that have conducted similar failed experiments around tax cuts at the top. But it is very much then actually contributing to an economic outcome that is unequal, and creates even more barriers for public schools to overcome. I think it's important to note that these barriers exacerbate existing racial inequalities. So this graph just shows you that the share of the tax reduction received by racial and ethnic group compared to the share of taxpayers in North Carolina. This is largely the result of historic inequities in wealth and income, but you can see that the share of tax reductions, a greater share is going to white households than they represent as taxpayers, and a smaller share is going to Black households and Latina households relative to their share of taxpayers. So what this economic policy of cutting taxes at the top will do is not only undermine public funding for education, it will grow economic and income inequality in a way that public schools will be faced with even greater demands on their capacity to provide a quality education to every child. Many of you likely have followed the Leandro plan and the cost estimates that are out there of what it would take for North Carolina to meet that commitment to fund, fully fund the Leandro plan, fully fund that commitment that is in our state constitution to provide every child with a sound basic education. That number is roughly $6.9 billion. And as I said, that could be more than paid for if we stopped the scheduled income tax cuts, which will cost us $13.4 billion annually after 2031. So there is a choice around public education, around our economy, around our state budget that really will matter for generations. And right now we're calling on everyone who cares about public schools, who cares about North Carolina's future, to urge lawmakers to choose our communities over corporations and stop the march to zero income tax. So there's an action there that I'm happy to put back up later if you'd like, but we hope you'll consider taking that action. I'll close by saying North Carolina's economic well-being and ability to deliver an economy that works for all depends on the adequate and equitable funding of public schools. I hope you have some more evidence to make this case in your community and to support better policy choices that ensure every child has access to this critical tool for economic opportunity. And I've also shared a link to our election guide on budget and tax issues. This is, again, a nonpartisan election guide on the issues that just gives you some sample questions to ask candidates about where they stand on budget and tax issues. Thank you so much, and I look forward to talking to you more about these connections and the opportunity that public education presents for schools, for our economy.